Spanning the globe, it's World Affairs Roundup.
The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents World Affairs Roundup, a monthly edition of International Focus, providing opinion and analysis of global events, with John Katzka, a retired member of the U.S. Foreign Service, Ann Hamilton, political scientist at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service, and Robert Kraig, executive director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin and author of articles and books on American foreign policy. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now, here's your moderator, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus and another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. Our Roundup regulars are here once again to take a look at the battle for Kobani. A small number of Iraqi Kurdish fighters this week entered the fray around the embattled Syrian city of Kobani. While their numbers aren't significant, the route they took may prove to be. They entered the battle via Turkey. Is this reluctant NATO ally ready to ramp up its fight against ISIS? Ebola policy and politics. As politicians struggle to craft their responses to this virulent virus, is science taking a backseat to PR? Bashing Bibi, a considerably less than diplomatic term for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, used by a senior Obama administration official in a recent interview, has blown a fresh chill over relations between Washington and Jerusalem. How special is this special relationship these days? And transition in Zambia. Following the death of President Michael Sata in a London hospital, Zambia has tapped VP Guy Scott as interim president. What does the appointment of the first African head of state with European roots in many years tell us about Zambia's political culture? Well, welcome back, everyone. And John, I know you're eager to get back to Zambia, but first let's take a side trip to Kobani. And what's the significance of this little contingent of Iraqi Kurds?
Well, first of all, they're Peshmerga troops. Then those are Iraqi Kurds. And according to Turkey, which is playing a major role in deciding how this is going to come out, they're acceptable Kurds as opposed to the Syrian and Turkish Kurds. What we know is that their first contingents are there, and the second and reinforcements are coming. They're delicately calling them providers of equipment and support as opposed to actual fighters. The important thing to look at this is in Turkey's reaction to this whole thing.
And let's talk a little bit about geography. I mean, the Syrian city of Kobani is pretty much smack right on the border with Turkey. So.
Right on the border with Turkey. And the Turks have been very reluctant to become involved in the ISIS affair. Strategically, they look at the Kurds and Assad as being much more important and much bigger enemies than the ISIS is. And this is something that I think both our Western pressure as well as circumstances have pushed them into a more aggressive stance. But this doesn't mean that Turkish troops are going to be on the ground anytime soon.
So, and what about just the significance of the town itself? I mean, were it to fall, how big a deal would that be?
Well, it's important because it would give ISIS a swath along the border that would, in an area where they don't have much presence right now. But it's mostly symbolic, and a lot of people are concerned because while so much attention is being paid to Kobani, the Assad's troops are surrounding Aleppo. There's a lot going on in the rest of the country, but a lot of the energy is going into Kobani. So it would certainly, it's significant, but it's not as significant as the amount of attention that's being paid to it might suggest.
So, Robert, what is the political sort of aftershocks of that? Have we now raised this to a point where it would be very bad optically if the city fell?
I think so, because even though I think Anne's absolutely right, it's not strategically that important compared to the attention. It now has all this attention, and so if it falls, it looks like ISIS is on the march, et cetera, et cetera. And it also looks like a failure for the Obama administration, and air power as playing a major role. At least this is some small contingent of land power at some level. And so I think so. I guess the symbolic importance has made its real importance greater.
I'll throw in a counterpoint to that. I think it would be much worse if ISIS loses it than if they are successful. We can always say we didn't have the troops on the ground. We tried, it was a good fight, but it just didn't happen. It was just another one of these marks on the map that went the wrong way. But for ISIS, this is a very, very important thing. They're pouring everything into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is sort of the first test case of we're able to prevail even against American air power and the coalition arrayed against us.
This is the first raid since the air power, the raids. And there have been 60+ bombings into the Kobani areas in the last 4 or 5 days.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Kurdish situation and Turkey. John, you mentioned these are in fact sort of the Iraqi Kurds who are more palatable to Ankara. And what are some of the other issues?
Well, they believe, the Turkish government believes that the Kurds fighting on the Syrian side are working together with the PKK, with whom they've had the Turkish Kurdish party, with whom they've had a 30-year civil war. So they don't trust them. They see them as terrorists. And I think that the Turkish point that they keep making to the United States and the rest of the coalition, that they need an integrated approach, that, you know, really if we defeat ISIS, you still have the problem of the Assad government in Syria. And so this is just really just a tiny part of the problem, and it's creating a big problem for Turkey. So I think that a lot of the arguments that they're making make a lot of sense. I think that, you know, they're turning to the Iraqi Kurds sort of as a, you know, it's a response to pressure, but it means that they're not having to allow the Turkish Kurds to go over and fight across the border.
Well, what about the sort of bigger impact for Kurdish aspirations in general? Secretary Kerry said, quoting here, to be irresponsible and morally very difficult not to support the Kurds.
I think he's talking about the Kurds in Kobani. I don't think he's talking about the Kurds in general.
But is that a distinction made by Kurds?
Possibly not. But that again points to U.S. policy regarding this, which I think has been very ad hoc. We still haven't figured out how we're putting this coalition together, who's got what responsibilities. We're not up into the leadership role yet, and maybe that'll come, but it hasn't come yet.
And one of the concerns right now is whether the Kurds who are coming from Iraq will actually be able to work with the Kurds in Syria well, because they're not exactly united and haven't had the experience of fighting together.
Well, I think you make a good point, Doug. That is, the Kurds are not used to being this front and center. And so they're literally at the center of international global politics at the moment for just moving 150 people through Turkey because of the whole history and ongoing civil war there. So how it'll play out is hard to say, but the Kurds are much more prominent than usual. And I assume that there are Kurdish leaders on all three countries that hope to take advantage of that and use the leverage.
We also should mention that the Kurds are, even within their countries, are not necessarily united, especially in Iraq. They're at each other's throats as much as they are at the Shias and the Sunnis in Iraq.
Well, kind of the exit question here, what is it we would like to see from Turkey? I mean, this is a very reluctant combatant in this struggle. I mean, in a perfect world, what do you think the Pentagon would like the Turkish military to be doing right now?
I think I'd rather look at what the State Department would like to see happen than the Pentagon. Because the Pentagon is part of the prosecution of the war, the State Department more in terms of what do we do after the war and what does this lead to. And that's, you have to understand Turkey's situation here, and I don't think we're going to move them too far on this. I think we moved them as far as we're going to for now.
Well, let's move from the battlefield to the emergency ward and talk a little bit about Ebola. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the case that's gotten a lot of press in this country, Casey Hickox, a nurse who had some controversy with some political figures we have heard from before. Talk about what happened with her.
Well, she is a nurse who was volunteering with Doctors Without Borders and in Sierra Leone for about a month, and she had the misfortune of being on her way home, I believe, from her months volunteering there when Governor Christie and Governor Cuomo, Christie of New Jersey and Cuomo of New York, announced a 21-day quarantine for all people who had had contact with Ebola cases in West Africa. And so she arrived, and this is as a result of a doctor coming home who was following all the protocols in New York, and then he developed a fever. So this created mass panic. And she arrived home and found this quarantine. She lives in Maine and wanted to go home to Maine, but she found herself subject to this quarantine in a tent in a hospital near Newark, New Jersey, with a porta potty. So this sort of became a public relations episode that took on a life of its own, along with everything else.
So Robert, was Governor Christie just being a careful guardian of the health of his constituents, or was there more to the story?
I hate to be cynical, but this has become highly political, and it's the worst nature of politicians when they take advantage of public hysteria, which is understandable when you have a scary disease that seems to kill people so readily, and people put aside the questions of how, it's much harder to catch than the common cold or flu or most other communicable diseases. And so it seems like politicians are one-upping each other in order to show how strong they are, hard they are in Ebola, like tough on crime, tough on Ebola policies, right?
The interesting point here is that this is rather bipartisan, because we have Cuomo in New York, who's a Democrat, and Christie, who's a Republican in New Jersey.
I wasn't blaming any one partisan.
I understand.
In fact, ironically, Rick Perry, of all people, the governor of Texas, has been a voice of reason. Yes. So is Ron Paul, but not his son, who's running for president.
So, and to what extent is this an opportunity to draw a distinction between aspirants for 2016 and the Obama administration? I mean, is the CDC a proxy for Obama?
I don't think so. I think what has probably happened is that this one caught everyone a little bit unaware and unprepared. And when doctors say there is minimal or low danger, that doesn't mean no danger. And people react as they do for almost every one of the other healthcare scares we've had, with a lot of fear and a lot of negativity.
I find it really troubling, though, and I know that a lot of people don't support me on this, but I find it very troubling because the United States has had one death from Ebola, and everybody else so far has gotten out of the hospital. And it's a reflection of nobody believes what the doctors is saying. And here you have people who are going abroad and trying to help, and they're treated very poorly when they come back. And we look like the height of isolationists, like, oh my goodness,
and
we've had one.
And it's more dangerous, right? We then do less to prevent the outbreak in Africa, and then we make it more likely that it's going to come here.
And it's this is very bizarre scenario of the United States acting so afraid of this, when I don't really think it's warranted.
Well, we have the president criticizing the governors, and then the Defense Department declaring a 21-day quarantine for all people coming back from there. So, who's the choreographer for this
thing?
You'd
like to think that there was enough discipline in our democracy for us to not partisanize everything, right, and make everything political. Couldn't we be unified on this tragedy and try to actually help where the help is needed in Africa?
Well,
apparently not.
Well, that's an opinion that'll get you quarantined, Dr. Kraig, but let's take a short break and we'll come back with more of our World Affairs Roundup.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to our World Affairs Roundup and our Roundup regulars. Well, Robert, maybe you can take the first swing at this one. There was a bit of a flap caused by an interview in Atlantic by an unnamed senior administration official in which he used a less than diplomatic term for Benjamin Netanyahu. And talk a little bit about sort of the context of that and delicately dance around what he actually said.
Well, I mean, we can probably provide a better diplomatic interpretation to people because apparently it doesn't translate well into Hebrew. So it also doesn't translate well into public television. So therefore we will say that he compared him, used a conceptual metaphor for him, which is similar to an organic discharge from chickens. So, and this is probably how it came across in Hebrew as well. Like, they did what? So this has caused outrage and a further chilling in relations and various shots back and forth across the bow. Quite frankly, probably simply reflecting the deteriorating relations already existed. It's simply a symptom of that.
But what was the context? I mean,
it had to do whether he was a coward or not, whether he would actually ever do anything to bring
Iran.
Well, whether he'd take a really, aggressive action in terms of Iranian nuclear weapons, but also whether he had the wherewithal to do anything about the peace process, and that he was someone who is parochial and only thinks about his political survival and nothing else, and therefore nothing bold or diplomatic or real can come from him. That's what the chicken conceptual metaphor was supposed to convey, a lack of resolve in almost any area.
So other than predictable indignation on Mr. Netanyahu's part,
once explained to him, yes.
What was his response? I mean, he explained the attack in what way?
He said that he rejected it completely. He said that he was concerned about the safety, security of Israel. He was a lot of people have come to his defense in the government and said that he's the president not only of all Israel, but all the Jews around the world, and that they were very insulted by this. And
so he was being insulted for his strong stand in support of his country.
Right.
So of course the corollary of that is the people doing the insulting have a different view. So yes. What are really the underlying issues, John? And Robert touched on some of this. I mean, that have really put that relationship in a very rough patch.
Well, we are in strong disagreement about what we should be doing in Iran. These aren't the first remarks that have been made. Israel's defense minister has referred to Secretary Kerry as obsessive and messianic, and among other things. Those are printable, and we can mention them on public television, but they're not kind or building a good relationship. And then we have the issue of the settlements. We keep telling them they shouldn't be building settlements. They keep building them and saying, forget you.
Well, so one of the things that Mr. Netanyahu's administration suggested is maybe it's time just to bypass the Obama administration, and there are other avenues for dialogue and engagement with the American people, specifically saying going directly to Congress and sort of appealing to the people more directly. Is this in any way have any other precedents? I mean, is there other instances in which another government, particularly one with whom we have warm relations, is gotten to the point where we're saying, well, we'll just not talk to your leader anymore and we'll go directly to others?
Well, considering the fact that the Congress almost unilaterally, almost totally, has been a major supporter of Israel, they probably would find a more reception there. the American people, I don't think, is part of this equation.
That's where you can't find a parallel, right? There aren't many foreign powers that have such effective lobbying organizations in other countries or have APAC and the other infrastructure. So it's unprecedented because I can't think of another example. Perhaps you'd have to go back to whatever support there was for England among Anglophiles in the 19th century, but I don't even think it compared.
Yes. Or the French. Or the French.
Right.
And Netanyahu has been doing this all along, so this is not just a threat. Well, now he's fed up, so he's going to go to Congress. He has been going to Congress and trying to work through Sheldon Adelman, right, which really pushes all of Obama's buttons.
Let me look at it from the other side. Obama did not endear himself to Israel and the Israeli people when he came into office. He carried with him certain associations with radical left people that were more connected to the Palestinian cause. Then he went to Cairo rather than to Israel. And these things were registering there. And what this means is that Netanyahu has probably more support in Israel on this issue regarding Obama, not necessarily on the U.S. relationship, but regarding Obama. And so letting this out at this particular time was a very surprising thing, coming as it is so close to the election.
So, assuming then it does have a genuine effect on the relationship, and assuming for a moment that it is, at least in the 2 years remaining in the Obama administration, going to be largely a state of chill, what does that mean going forward for both sides in terms of just policy? I mean, how might the last 2 years of a lame duck Obama administration behave differently?
There's speculation that the administration which controls this could remove some of its protection at the UN. And they might allow...
Meaning what? Give us an
well,
example.
they probably wouldn't have them, recognize the Palestinian state, but they might allow them to take action and sanction the settlement activity, for example, is what some people are speculating.
So typically, I mean, if there's a resolution in the UN critical of Israel in some way, it's historically, more often than not, they can count on the U.S. recognizing or exercising its veto.
And playing goalie, so to speak, and if there's going to be an empty net.
Right, and particularly for things like investigating, I know they've recently vetoed a resolution on investigating allegations of war crimes in Gaza and things like that. So they might withdraw their cover from that.
And what about Iran? Does this impact ongoing negotiations with Iran over the nuclear program?
Well, I think Iran was very interested to see that Israel no longer has the capability of destroying their nuclear weapons, as was suggested in the Atlantic Monthly article, that Israel, if they were going to do something according to the article, they needed to have done it 2 or 3 years ago, and that now it wouldn't be possible. Well, I don't know where that comes in from Iran's point of view, but that may make some people relax a little bit.
So we'll just have to keep an eye on that one. I think it really is more of a personal antipathy, wouldn't you say, at this point? I mean, the relationship as a whole is likely to survive once these two personages are off the scene.
Well, the relationship has to survive because we need them as a dependable ally. The problem I see from the U.S. point of view is that Israel is not part of the United States, and therefore there are times when we are going to disagree, and that's not a bad thing. We have our interests, they have theirs.
Well, we'll leave it at that. But John, we want to give you a chance to stroll down memory lane to a place where you once served, and tell us a little bit about what happened this week in Zambia.
Well, President Michael Sata died in England. Had apparently been ill for quite a while. An interesting thing, and it's very Zambian in a way. His vice president is a white man, born in Zambia. Born in northern Rhodesia, and went off for schooling in England and came back, was a close confidant of the president. In fact, was often seen as the person who, the president was referred to as King Cobra because he had a rather acid approach to interaction with his colleagues and with the public. And so the the guy Scott was along to what the president really meant to say was, that sort of thing. This is a symbolic thing. He is not eligible, according to the Constitution, to run for the presidency. And in 90 days, there will be an election. When Sata left the country, the defense minister, Lungu, was put in charge. But that made it awkward because Lungu was going to be a candidate for president. And so the cabinet meeting, and this is also very Zambian, they worked this out amongst all the tribes. And they said, we'll put Scott in charge so that he can deal with this 90 days, and then everyone's free to go out and campaign.
Well, very good. Well, that's a campaign we'll have to keep an eye on. And,
wow.
In the meantime, we hope you'll tune in again. Thank you all for joining us once again, and thanks to our viewers. We'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,